Hello and welcome to all our participants on our forum's latest roundtable discussion. This evening's topic is PM's France visit and imminent defense technology deals. This discussion shall unravel the nuances of India-France strategic partnership in defense sectors. I'm Colonel M.K. Singh, Director of Research at FGS, and for this very important discussion, I am joined by Major General Sanjay Soy, Advisory Board Member at the FGS, and our very special guest, a renowned defense analyst, Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar. Sir, we are delighted to have you on our panel, and I extend a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Commodore Bhaskar is one of the leading security and strategic affairs expert of India, who is currently the Director of Society for Policy Studies, an independent think tank based in New Delhi. He has the rare distinction of being the head of 3 think tanks during his illustrious career, the earlier 2 being IDSA and National Maritime Foundation. In addition, he is well-known columnist, editor, and contributor of numerous research articles on nuclear and international security issues to reputed journals in India and abroad. He is also a life member of United Service Institution of India. Commodore Bhaskar was later appointed Member Secretary of Government of India Task Force on Global Strategic Developments, a report submitted to the Prime Minister. He has been a guest lecturer at the Indian NDC, NATO College, Rome, and Foreign Service Institute in the US State Department. He was a visiting scholar in international security at McGill University, Montreal, Canada, and a fellow at University of Pavia, Italy. He is recipient of VSM and the Prime Minister's letter of commendation. He has been on the advisory panel of India International Center and India Habitat Center at New Delhi. He's also president, Association for Middle Eastern Studies, New Delhi, a council member of Takshila Foundation, Bengaluru, and a member of Asia Pacific Leadership Network, Seoul. Commodore Bhaskar has hosted a weekly show on national TV and has contributed a daily column to the Statesman during the January 91 Kuwait War. Currently, he writes for South China Morning Post, Hong Kong, The Quint, Indian Express, and the Tribune. Now coming to the topic per se. In 1998, when India conducted nuclear tests in Pokhran, America and other Western countries imposed many sanctions on India. France was the only country in the West which supported India during that time. This fostered a new era of friendship between the 2 strategic partners. Now, on the 25th anniversary of this, Prime Minister Modi has been invited as a guest of honor on the French National Day. Accordingly, this morning, Prime Minister Modi left for France on a 2-day official visit. Earlier in 2009, PM Manmohan Singh was invited at the same occasion. This time, a 269-member strong Indian contingent comprising of all 3 services will also be participating in this parade, apart from a flypast by Indians on board Rafale aircrafts. However, this partnership is not new. Actually, in 1953, Tufani fighter aircrafts were imported from France, and in 60s, Alouette helicopters and Mirages in 1980 were also brought from France. Coming to some questions, may now come with the first question, sir. What is the significance of this special honor bestowed upon Prime Minister Modi in the light of strategic talks on the ongoing important defense deals with India? And what significant defense deals are on the anvil, sir?
First of all, good evening, everybody. And thank you for inviting me. I'd like to thank the Forum for Global Studies for giving me these opportunities. And I also want to tell all our viewers who are part of the show that I'm sorry that you had to listen to an introduction that sounded more like an obituary, but thanks to MK for giving all the details of my professional career. But that having been said, I think the relevance of the importance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to France is at many levels. The first is there is a politico-diplomatic context, which is that when France invites any leader, global leader, for the Bastille Day parade, it is a very special occasion for them. And it's a reflection of the importance accorded by Paris, both to the guest of honor in his or her individual capacity, as also to the country represented. So I would say that this is an acknowledgement both of India and Prime Minister Modi's own profile on the global international arena. Furthermore, I think for Modi Saab in particular, there is a back-to-back kind of endorsement, meaning that in June this year, he was accorded a state visit by the United States, where he was hosted by President Joe Biden. And we are aware of the manner in which he was received there. And almost a few weeks later, he's being received in France. So I would say that this is again an acknowledgement of his own profile. But apart from the bilateral and Mr. Modi's own personal, I would say, profile as a leader, I think there is a whole strategic and tactical dimension to the Modi visit to France in 2023. I think, MK, you have rightly drawn attention to 1998 and the way in which France had then responded to India's nuclear tests when Prime Minister Vajpayee was at the helm of national affairs. And I think there was an intrinsic empathy in the way in which France responded, which was very unlike that of the United States and the other Western allies, whether it was Great Britain or even smaller countries like Australia, who were part of the US alliance, as also Asian countries like both China and paradoxically even Japan. So at a time when the larger global community was extremely critical of Prime Minister Vajpayee and the 1998 nuclear tests, France and, let me add, Russia were the only two major countries that had a more empathetic response. And I think this is one of the characteristics of the India-France bilateral relationship. And let me add in the same breath that this was not the first time that France had shown what I would call as an empathetic and positive response in matters nuclear, because in 1974, when again, the United States chose to impose sanctions after India's peaceful nuclear explosion, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was then the Prime Minister. It was France that stepped in to help India with Tarapur at that time, the civilian nuclear part of India's energy endeavor. So this, I think, are some of the fine print about the India-French relationship. And now with Prime Minister Modi on this it's not state visit, but definitely a summit level visit, I think it's very important that there is a strategic dimension, which is about how this relationship can be taken forward. Both sides have to agree what will be the contour. And at the tactical level, yes, there is talk about the Rafale aircraft. There is talk about having some kind of a deal on the Scorpion submarine, as also other areas. But I think all this will be confirmed when the final statement is released. But the potential is there. France can be a very important partner for India in India's Atmanirbhar endeavor. But much of it will depend on the nature of the commercial and technology clauses and how India is able to do the heavy lifting once agreements are inked. MK?
This is great, sir. Thank you so much for such insightful view. And in fact, I fully agree with you that the kind of jointness between India and France is in many fields. In fact, as rightly brought out by MK and sir, then by you, is that the kind of support which we got from France for after our nuclear test. And then we have been together, we have been joining hands for whether it is Jaitapur plant or in the space also. So Jaitapur still has some issues are there, but I think with these visits and regular interaction, those things are also getting narrowed down. And similar thing is in the space also. These two fields both have been working together for many years. So I would like to understand, like, is there any scope of India looking for nuclear propulsion system for its nuclear submarines with France, with say any cooperation, because we have been depending on Russia for in this nuclear and space field. But is there any scope or any talks are on the anvil and collaboration is possible between France and India for nuclear propelled submarines and space program, both.
No, I think these are two very important areas. And I would make the following observation as an analyst, that if we talk about the long term and a strategic contour to the India-French long-term partnership, space and nuclear would definitely be boxes that would fall under the category of the strategic framework. Because as far as the immediate focus, whether it's on the aircraft, the jet engine, or for that matter, the Scorpion submarine, I would say that these are all tactical.
Yes.
These are required for India to improve its own operational and combat proficiency. The Air Force is in dire need of fighter jets. This is not the first time that we are getting fighter jets from a foreign country, as we rightly pointed out, MK reminded us. In 1953, India got its first fighter from France. Over the years, we have acquired fighter jets from a number of countries. France is one, former Soviet Union, UK, and now America is on the cards for a possible deal with the US also. So getting a fighter aircraft is not new. We have done it in the past. Yes, what kind of technology transfer, what kind of manufacturing know-how is also given would be a big plus. But yet it is tactical. Where I think we hit the strategic level is, for instance, in space, in cyber, in AI. All of these are new technologies, and France has got niche capability. If India can arrive at the right kind of partnership, I think for the long term, I'm talking about 30, 40 years, I think there is a lot of potential because France will also benefit by having a deep and long-term partnership with a country like India. And specific to nuclear, potential for the India-France bilateral. Reason being, France has always exuded a certain autonomy. As we said earlier, that even when the United States and all the allies were ready to condemn India because the US had said so, it was France that stepped aside and said, no, we will frame our own individual independent response in relation to India. And even within the framework of NATO and the US alliance, which at that time had been created to counter the former Soviet Union, France maintained its own strategic autonomy and profile, even in relation to United States and NATO. So in many ways, I would say there is an overlap or correspondence between France's inclination for a certain degree of autonomy and independence of taking decisions, while remaining within the Western alliance, which is not very different, I would say, in terms of strategic culture, with India's preference for what we used to call as non-alignment during the Cold War decades. And now we refer to a preference for strategic autonomy. So that is the strategic, I would say, correspondence in terms of the orientation of the two nations. And in the nuclear field, France has again exhibited considerable independence of action. They have made their own path as far as nuclear propulsion is concerned, as far as the submarine is concerned. Unlike UK, which is dependent on the US, unlike Australia, which is now dependent on the US, unlike Japan, which is dependent on the American umbrella, it is only France in the Western alliance that has acquired its own design and propulsion, nuclear propulsion capability. And this is manifest in its navy. Apart from the US, France is the only country that has a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. France is the only country that has its own attack submarines, what we call as the SSN. France is the only country that has its own design for the SSBN. So while it was not a superpower in the Cold War, US was, former USSR was, but not France. France was considered to be a medium power, but yet it had all the niche capabilities that we associate with the former superpower in definitely the naval domain. So my submission would be that yes, France, we have a legacy relationship with France. So if this can be explored in the Modi visit and some preliminary talks can be held, I think there is a possibility, but we'll have to proceed very carefully because no country parts easily with nuclear propulsion know-how, because it's all about the reactor. It is about the ability to have a compact reactor that can go underwater into a submarine and perform at optimum levels with zero error. And these are the kind of issues I think that could be discussed with France. And as you pointed out, Janasa, we already have a civil nuclear kind of history with France. So the whole package, I think, can be brought up to the 2023 level and then taken forward up to 2063, if you ask me.
That's great. Yeah, MK. MK, you are muted.
Sir, you have very rightly pointed out as to how our nuclear propulsion system is important to us, especially in the light of our declared no first use policy in nuclear doctrine. And that's where we require these nuclear powered submarines for sure. And sir, coming to the European Union countries, there are countries like America, Britain, Germany, Canada, who are often very critical of Indian human rights issues in India or issues in Jammu and Kashmir and things like that. And when we look at France, we see that they have been very, what should I say? They've been going along with the Indian line of thought. And that's how I realize with these new naval aircrafts coming, Rafale aircrafts for our Navy, with 26 of them likely to be acquired very soon, how is it going to change the texture in the Indo-Pacific?
Number one, I think if India is able to conclude an agreement with France for acquiring the maritime version of the Rafale, which is for the aircraft carrier, that would be a very big plus for India and the Indian Navy, because as of now, our aircraft carrier does not have a dedicated and fighter aircraft which is compatible with the aircraft carrier and designed for an aircraft carrier. The Rafale, with its maritime version, has got these attributes. And currently, India is having to make a kind of interim arrangement with the MiG-29 for one of the aircraft. We are hoping that the Indian LCA, the naval version, would be available very quickly. But as of now, there are, I would say, certain inadequacies in the aircraft for the fighter jet for the aircraft carrier. So to that extent, if the Modi visit leads to a successful agreement about inducting the 26th Rafale maritime version, it would definitely enhance India's own trans-border combat capability, because that is what the aircraft carrier with fighter aircraft is all about, that you can project Indian power into the Indian Ocean wherever there is a need. And that is what the floating airfield concept of the aircraft carrier is all about. And specific to the Indian Ocean, MK, I would say that, again, this is a very important area for bilateral cooperation, because France is a very important Indian Ocean power. It is a resident Indian Ocean power largely because of the Réunion Island. It has assets, geographical assets in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, it also has a vast exclusive economic zone, which is almost 2.6 or 2.7 million square kilometers. So which means there is a whole, potential, the whole area domain for the blue economy, for harnessing the resources of the ocean in a way that would benefit the larger Indian Ocean littoral nations. And both France and India are important members of the Indian Ocean community. And if you remember, a few years ago, when France was talking about the Indo-Pacific, after this particular strategic construct came into the discourse, France also expressed concern about the rise of China and both the assertiveness and in relation to the South China Sea, the belligerence of China. And therefore, there was a shared interest that India and France could perhaps enter into some kind of partnership, sharing of data, information in relation to China. Not that we have made any dramatic progress, but if you remember, just as India and the US have the Malabar exercise for the two navies, we have Varuna for India and the France. And the last iteration that I remember was the 19th such bilateral exercise. So which means that India and France have already arrived at a fairly good level of interoperability as far as the navies are concerned. And I think this can be taken forward, whereby the India-France bilateral can complement both the India-US bilateral, the India-Japan bilateral, the India-Australia, where there is such a case. And finally, if there is a need, the Quad and its own activities can be complemented by France. So you see a lattice. And I think India and France would both benefit from looking at the Indian Ocean across the spectrum, not just about strategic capabilities, whether it is the nuclear submarine, aircraft carrier, and so on, but also the blue economy, or what I would call as the developmental agenda, which will help the human security of the citizens along the Indian Ocean littoral. And finally, France also has a high degree of competence in oceanography, in R&D related to the oceans. And that is critical for climate change, because not many people recognize the linkage between the health of the ocean and, for instance, the regularity of the monsoon in South Asia. If the Indian Ocean does not have these stable parameters for salinity, pollution levels, temperature, etc., the monsoon can get affected. And if the monsoon is disrupted, this is not just El Nino, this is specific to the Indian monsoon, as we call it. And that could have very dire consequences for the entire South Asian region. And here we are talking about a demography that is in excess of 2.3, 2.4 billion people. So I think the India-France partnership related to the maritime domain has a truly strategic underpinning. And here strategic goes well beyond the security connotations that we are aware of. MK?
Thank you, sir. This is wonderful. Absolutely right, sir. In fact, the Indian Ocean is the area probably where both parties are interested, and absolutely both have a lot of stakes to do. And I think with the expansionist philosophy of China, and we got to be, I mean, if we join hands together, it will be win-win situation for both of us. And then going further and slightly digressing, one of the issues which I'm sure would be discussed during the visit would be the Russia-Ukraine war, which is going on for last more than 2 years. And it is absolutely, 1.5 years. So what India has been playing a neutral role, and what do you see the important role that can be played by India in brokering peace, sir, at this point of time?
I think specific to the Ukraine war, which, as you rightly pointed out, has now crossed 500 days and it is proceeding towards the second year, India has taken a very prudent position. While there had been some criticism initially in Western capitals and in the US that India was sitting on the fence and not taking a position similar to what the US and the Western allies had done, I think there was good reason for India in maintaining the position that it did. And our Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, I think, has elucidated this in a very compelling manner.
Absolutely.
As far as the Ukraine war is concerned, I think Prime Minister Modi has been conveying whatever needed to be conveyed to Moscow in a manner that is appropriate for what I would call as confidential and sensitive communication between two leaders. So I think what he had said in public at the last summit, when he said that this is not a time for war, the SCO summit, I think in many ways the sentiment had been conveyed to Moscow in a way that I think Moscow also understood that India had its own reservations about what Russia had done. But at the same time, India was not going to publicly either condemn or humiliate President Putin, because it was of the view that this could be conveyed in private. And mind you, this is not the first time. Perhaps our viewers may recall that when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan in 1979, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at that time. And she, in 1980, as the official record shows, conveyed India's disappointment with then former Soviet Union's actions. And this was, as I said, conveyed at the very highest levels by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, but in a manner, again, that did not either embarrass or humiliate the former Soviet Union, because we did have a very close relationship even with the former Soviet Union during the Cold War decades. So I think a responsible power, a medium power like India, in the context of the Cold War and what is happening even now, if your objective is to assuage and improve the situation, it is better done by quiet diplomacy at the summit level. And I think my understanding is none of this is in the public domain, but clearly Prime Minister Modi has been able to reach out to President Putin. And perhaps, and this is a big perhaps, the G20 summit in Delhi, when it is held in September, it is a forum where all the global leaders will be present. And one cannot rule out the possibility that perhaps even India and France does have a fairly, I would say, empathetic relationship with Russia. Maybe they could have a pull aside, as they call it, with President Putin and convey some of the sentiments that are being discussed bilaterally. So to that extent, I would say that there is a possibility for India and France to, first of all, share their own concerns about the war in Ukraine, how it is impacting each of them. France is also very concerned about the refugee issue. After all, if you remember, recently France had a serious domestic crisis with its own French citizens of African origin and the way in which they had responded to the killing of that teenager by the French police. Now, there is a very, I would say, subterranean but visible level of anxiety in France about immigrants and refugees. Even if they are European refugees, as the Ukrainians are now being described as, they may not be immigrants of a different color as the African immigrants are. But at the same time, the strain on the French system is palpable. So I think France has its own concerns about the war in Ukraine going from year 2 into year 3. And India has its own concerns about not only oil prices, but even fertilizer availability and what this will do to food security and a whole range of other issues, including the global supply chain. So I think this is an appropriate moment for the two leaders to definitely have a consultation and see whether or not it would be appropriate for them to raise it with the Russian president, maybe, again, as I said, maybe in Delhi.
Sir, thank you so much, sir, for your illuminating insights. Now left with very little time, so I will just like to conclude by saying that India can also take help of France in getting entry as permanent member in United Nations Security Council. And I think France would be more than happy to be helping India in that course, since it has been supporting India. And sir, yes, sir. Any last quick words, sir?
A quick word, MK, is that India getting into the Security Council as a permanent member with a veto, to my mind, is a non-starter. You know, various countries can extend diplomatic support, political support, but as long as you have China in the United Nations Security Council, even if the other 4 members agree, the other 4 permanent members, China is not going to permit. So I think this stark reality should be recognized, but I don't want to pour cold water. Please go ahead, MK. I'm sorry for saying this.
We are left with of thanks by Dr. Sandeep Tripathi is invited.
Thank you so much, sir, Manoj sir, for your beautiful, excellent moderation. So first of all, I would like to thank on behalf of the Forum for Global Studies to our privileged guest, the renowned authority on foreign affairs, especially on defense, and to whom, especially I, have been watching and reading you, sir, last 1 decade. So it's my privilege to have you today's this very important discussion on PM Modi's visit in France and its consequences on geopolitics as well as the global order. So thank you so much, sir. First of all, that you accepted our kind invitation. And during your very hectic schedule, I know that you are so busy in so many different channels, TV channels, but out of that, you have given your precious time for Forum for Global Studies. So it is really a great stride for all of us and for Forum for Global Studies. So thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much. Sir.
Looking forward to more interactions with you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And
Thank you,
I'll
sir.
join you again. Today I'm going, as you said, for a TV show, so
Yes.
I'll catch up with you again.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thomas, sir. Commodore, Uday Bhaskar, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.